let's kick off, and I'll do so by welcoming you warmly to this EIWO webinar. My name is Alan Walker from the University of Sheffield in the UK, and I'm one of the participants in the research project that is organising this webinar. That's Exclusion and Inequality in Late Working Life, or EIWO, which is a 4-country collaboration, as you can see here. In fact, there are 6 universities spanning 4 countries, as well as Sweden, Germany, Poland, and the UK. And the project is led by our Swedish colleague, Andreas Mottel-Klingberg, who some of you may have heard a moment or two earlier. So this webinar today is within the context of EIWO's research agenda. So as you can see, the EIWO program, spanning 6 years, focuses on the important issue of extending working lives, but coupled with the often overlooked issue of unequal access to the labour market, and certainly exclusion across all member states in the EU of certain groups. So as the Extending Working Lives agenda has been rolled out and deepened across Europe, often overlooked has been the unequal impact of that agenda on certain groups. And EIWO is intent on exposing those inequalities and raising discussion at a policy level about how we can try to prevent them arising in the first place. Okay, then within that context, the straightforward aims of today's webinar are, first of all, to look at the Swedish EU Presidency agenda, the coming agenda, with a view to questioning whether the important issue of extending working lives and inequalities are indeed within that agenda, and if not, how they could be put centrally to that agenda. And then secondly, of course, there is the shock of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has overridden many of the pre-existing policy agendas that our countries in Europe have been grappling with for a long time. This basically is so shocking and has such wide reverberations that it has an impact across the board on our thinking about all policy items. And we'd be seriously remiss if we didn't think about this issue in the light of the implications of that invasion of a previously peaceful country. So, what we've got on our agenda today are 4 speakers for around 15 minutes each, and then they'll be followed by 2 commentaries. The plan is to have plenty of time for discussion, and also there'll be opportunities to question the first 2 speakers if there are any issues that need clarification. So, without further ado, let's invite Indre Genelyte from Linköping University, that's the home of EIWO, to kick us off with a presentation about the EU Swedish presidency in 2023, with the subtitle, A Changing Policy Agenda. So over to you, Indre.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So my name is Indre Genelyte, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Division of Aging and Social Change at Linköping University. And today I will talk about the Swedish EU presidency in 2023 and the changing policy agenda. So to just start with, the current EU presidency period started in January this year, and it consists of 3 countries, which is France, Czechia, and Sweden. These countries take turns in leading the EU presidency, and they have come with a common program, which is very much related to the EU strategic agenda of 2019-2024 and is divided into 4 main policy areas. So first of all, protecting citizens and freedoms, then developing a strong and vibrant economic base, building a climate neutral, green, fair and social Europe, and finally promoting European interests and values on the global stage. So within this proposed agenda, we actually identified key policy areas relevant for the inclusive and equal prolongation of working life within this program presented by the 3 countries. So under the policy priority of protecting citizens and freedoms, we see that there's a lot of focus on the gender aspects, for instance, fighting gender inequalities or empowering economic independence of women, as well as protection of vulnerable groups who cannot take care of themselves. And finally, the implementation of EU's gender equality strategy is also mentioned as important. The second area, building a climate neutral, green, fair and social Europe, puts attention to demographic changes with a focus on social and labor market inclusion, care, as well as pointing out of the importance of active and healthy aging. The second message that comes from the 3 countries, also called TRIO, is about using opportunities provided by the green and digital transitions, which is also very much related to the extending or expanding employment and especially creating the green jobs. Finally, the importance of lifelong learning is also emphasized, which would, for instance, help the job-to-job transitions. And even the discussion or the strive for lifelong learning as an individual right is presented in this agenda. Another important context talking about the Swedish EU presidency is the current Swedish governmental priorities. And those are threefold. First one is related to inclusion and safety, where segregation is very much presented as an issue preventing young people to enter the labor market, where they end up in the criminal world. So breaking the segregation would increase the employment and safety. The second priority is referring to green transition and extended employment through all the country. And the last one is pointing out at the work-related social security over the life course. So the actual program for the Swedish EU presidency has not yet been presented, but there is an official Swedish EU presidency website, and there the updates are still quite rare. What we can see is that the questions about security became prominent since January 2022 in relation to Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, as well as climate issues were on Swedish ministers Hans Dahlgren's agenda for meetings in Poland and Berlin. Nevertheless, the political agenda is changing. So we can see that after Russia's invasion in Ukraine, Hans Dahlgren met with his counterpart from Czechia to discuss security issues in March. We can also observe that the public discourse in Sweden and Europe indicates a huge impact by the Russian invasion, including military cooperation. So the priorities in the overall political discourse are changing towards the national security, military support and alliances, as well as the questions of humanitarian aid, refugee migration, and migrant integration. Thus, this raises a few questions. How do European policy priorities change, and what does this change imply? Is inclusive and equal prolongation of working life still an issue within the changing political agenda. How do productivity, inclusiveness, equity, and sustainability contribute to the resilience of EU and European societies? And finally, is the change an opportunity for the social dimension and the green transition of Europe to be strengthened? And what role does the research have in it? So, as it was intended, there's a significant correspondence between the list of selected issues discussed or included in the agenda for the current EU presidency period and Swedish governmental priorities, as well as with EIWO's thematic agenda on inclusive, extended, and sustainable work. Much of it refers to the aging, green and digital transitions, and the problems of insufficient or unequal labor market participation, as well as productivity. So just a suggestion for the way forward is to say that inclusive and equal prolongation of late working life should remain on the changing political agenda. And it is one of the key priorities for building socially sustainable, green and shock resilient aging societies. EIWO is contributing to this goal by providing research evidence for policy development. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Indre. Let's just see if there are any immediate comments that people want to make, or indeed questions they want to ask before we move on through our panel. So, colleagues, are there any issues of clarification or points that you'd like to add at this stage?
If I may, Anne-Sophie?
Yes, Anne-Sophie, hi. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. Yes, thanks a lot for this update. It's very interesting also to see that you're able to notice the changes that they have introduced very recently, but very rightly, I would say, given the importance of the situation in Ukraine, and looking forward also, they are starting now to really look at the long term. And that was just a point for clarification or question which might be raised later on, I don't know. Are you able to feel or think that the project could help by looking at how can extending working life support the EU and Swedish efforts in general, all EU member states individually, but Sweden is playing a key role strategically also. And what kind of measures or support would be needed to help older workers contribute to the effort? Because we are, up until now, prolonging working lives, we looked at the barriers preventing older workers to stay longer, or willingly, or sometimes being mandated to continue longer by extending retirement ages. But here, I think there is a very strong feeling among EU citizens and people residing in the EU. Actually, it's even broader than that. Whatever their age, even children, it's amazing. And older persons, some of them even very old, they are all keen to know what they could do, and not only to solve the situation of migrants today, of our economy that needs to be supported to get a new start, and so, but also on the longer term. So I know it's a lot in front of us, but it would give a new light to the project, maybe, which might be very welcome. It's just a question. I don't know if you have been able to discuss that, or if you have heard that as something that could be useful from the project.
Thank you very much, and Sophie, a really excellent point. Indre, do you want to make a response, or do you want me to?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I think that, as I mentioned in my presentation, that actually to work on the more inclusive and equal working life and its prolongation is one important contribution that EIWO program can do. I also think that the question you posed on more particular measures is quite big one, and maybe we can take up some aspects in the discussion, but I guess it has not been so much time to reflect on more particular measures in that sense. Alan, maybe you can add something.
Well, what you said is excellent. I think Anne-Sophie raises the heart of the challenge, really. And bear in mind that of course, this project was applied for and negotiated and agreed when we lived in a world where we could not imagine that a country like Ukraine would be invaded. So we're all still suffering from emotional shock because of that. And the extent to which we can vary the second phase of the EIWO project is an open question, but certainly we need to have that discussion within the project. What we've done already is to begin to frame policies that will help to prevent or overcome existing inequalities within European labour markets, because we know that older workers, particularly older women, and particularly those from Black and minoritized ethnic groups, suffer discrimination within the labour markets. And what we're trying to frame is policies that would fit different European environments in order to both prevent and overcome those inequalities. So they could be used to apply to the new situation where I imagine the bulk of the migrants from Ukraine into other European countries are indeed older workers or women, so likely to be male older workers and or women. So in other words, groups that have experienced already discrimination in the labour market, you add migrant status to that, and that discrimination is likely to be heightened. So I think to answer Indre's question about whether this offers an opportunity, there does seem to be an opportunity for us to make proposals that would help Europe, at least in one dimension of its response to the Ukrainian outrage. But you're right, that's what the webinar is about. We'll take all ideas on board and take them back to the EIWO team and advisory board that Anne-Sophie sits on, and have that discussion to see if, rightly, if there are things that we can contribute that will help to at least ease the crisis we're facing. Thank you for that. So if there are no further questions, there can be later, we've got the time. Let's move on to our second speaker, which is Lise Bergh, who is former chair of the Commission for Gender Equal Lifetime Incomes in Sweden. Lise, you're very welcome. Thank you for contributing. I think you've got some slides.
To begin with, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. And my presentation is based on the Commission's report, Reduce the Gap, Measures for Equal Lifetime Incomes, so that I will keep in the remit of that report. And the overall aim for the Commission was to find ways to increase economic equality between women and men. And what we have done is that we have looked into models for pay transparency in the UK, Germany and Iceland to see if Sweden could incorporate parts of their models into our legislation. We have mapped the need for statistics about pay differences between women and men and how they can be followed over time. And I will come back to that because I think statistics and knowledge is, the base for the decision makers actually to take the right decisions when it comes to gender equality. We have also mapped the distribution of public support and measures for women and men and analyzed the economic consequences of their distribution for gender equality. And that was really interesting, I must say. And we have also done a review of how government agencies give information and guidance to women and men from a gender perspective. So the next slide, please. I will give you a very, very short overview of the status of gender equality when it comes to incomes in Sweden. First of all, women's lifetime income is about 3/4 of men's. And just to mention that life income, it is includes income from work, income from capital, from public transfers, and pensions. And when you come to income from work, the average income gap is 9.8%. But note that is if everyone works full-time, and we know that women very often work part-time, at least more than men do. And it also is are large differences between the sectors. And just to give a few one example, the private sector, the overall gap is 9.5%. But if you look at blue-collar worker, it is 10.5%, and for white-collar workers, 15.3%. And the lowest gap is within the municipalities is 1.8%, the gap, and regions 17.9%. So you see there are a big difference between the sectors. And what we also can see is that the increased capital income, which grows faster than earned income, has consequences, of course, for economic equality. Today, women have 50% of men's capital income, and that is quite low, of course. And then the COVID pandemic has meant increased differences as well, which we need to take care of, as many women have lost more in income than men, because the COVID had a big impact on hotels and restaurants, wholesale and retail trade, where more women than men have been affected. So in total, even if the gap in income of work has been reduced, the gap in income from capital has widened. So overall, there is a relatively unchanged gap in disposable income between women and men since 1995. So that is good to know. Then I will say a little bit about knowledge and statistics. And I can, as I say here on the slide, it can't be stressed enough that accurate knowledge and analysis of the gender gap in income and the causes of the gap is crucial for decision makers to be able to close the gap, actually. And it may seem obvious for you as researchers, but in practice, we are not there. And our recommendations when it comes to statistics and a better knowledge is that there is still need for accurate, reliable, and transparent statistics. Which takes into account, actually the reality in the labor market. It should take into account working time, absence from work through, for instance, parental leave, sick leave, and also different terms of employment or forms of employment, etc. There is also, of course, need for mapping and analysis of the causes of pay difference between women and men. And also, of course, need for evaluation and follow-up. And we have had that like a red thread, I think, through the report, the need for follow-up and evaluation. And that is for all parties, concerned, from the government and within the agencies, and also, of course, by the social partners, which are very important, at least in Sweden, when it comes to gender equality at the labor market. And then, of course, need for transparency in pay. And we have the mission to look into the different models, as I said in the beginning. But then the EU Commission presented a draft directive on pay transparency. And as the draft still is under negotiation, we could not present sharp proposals for legislation, but we have actually analyzed the need for more transparency in pay, and we have given proposals in principle about the need in different perspectives. And of course, there is important to have an intersectional perspective. We have specifically looked into differences between women and men with disabilities, women and men born in Sweden or born in other countries, and also women and men with different socioeconomic backgrounds. So there we need to have those perspectives all the time. We have been looking into factors that affect economic gender equality, and income from work is, of course, the most important source of income when it comes to individuals. But women, in relation then to men, have lower average incomes from work. We all know that. They are employed to a lesser extent. They work more part-time. They have more fixed-term employment. You know, they have hourly employments and so on. And they take more parental leave. They are more on sick leave. And all this means, of course, that they have a lower lifetime income from work than men. And then, of course, they do have a lower pension. So this is, as I said before, very important to take into account when you present statistics and knowledge. What is this due to? Yeah, it might be due to discrimination. We have discrimination in pay. We have discrimination in recruitment, in skills development, just to name a few. All of those have an impact, of course, on the income and of women and men actually staying on the labor market. Sweden have a gender segregated labor market. I think one of the most segregated markets in Europe. And here we have noted a special form of discrimination, and that is about the historical undervaluation of work, typically held by women. And our commission, together with lots of other reports and researchers, find that the undervaluation of jobs typically held by women is maybe one of the most important factors for explaining the still remaining gap, pay gap. And also, of course, then the most important factor to tackle to reduce the pay gap between women and men. And in Sweden, we call it value discrimination, actually. Then, of course, we have structures and norms in society and in individuals that affect the conditions for making choices. You know, when you make your study or career choice, you are very much impacted by the norms in society. And of course, that goes when you decide within a family who takes the parental leave, who works part-time, and as well as also harassment and violence, both at home but also in the workplace. So these we have to come to terms with, of course. And then we have system-related factors that affect the income gap between women and men. You can take, for instance, the construction of the social insurance system. And I will just give you one example that we brought up quite extensively in the report. That is the design of parental insurance, with its possibility, in Sweden at least, of transferring the leave days between parents. And this contributes both directly and indirectly to reproducing gender inequality compared with systems in which leave days are locked to each parent. So if parental insurance was reformed to introduce a full reservation of leave days to the father or the mother or the caretaker, whatever, this might affect norms and attitudes to parenthood and so on. So here is an example of how the design and the system works when it comes to gender equality. And that goes also for, we have the example of unemployment insurance. There are qualification requirements of how much you need to work to get the full benefits and so on. And when it comes to the design of the pension system, it clearly favors certain individuals. And we have made, we have said that you need to be educated, you need to grow up in Sweden, you need to enter the Swedish labor market quickly after completing the education. You need not to be absent for long periods on account of parental leave or illness, and you need not to retire early. And to a great extent, these individuals are men, we conclude, actually. So this is also some examples. And I would also like to say something about measures for increased gender equality at the workplaces, because this is really important, so that you can be able to actually stay longer in the labor market or at your workplace. And we have looked into to the workplaces. I have said non-gender equal workplaces give rise to both physical but also mental illness. And that is increasing in Sweden. And there are more women that are getting mental illness. I'm sorry about my English, but still, I guess you understand, which actually is increasing and related then sick leave. Of course, it has consequences for women's income. And we have looked at the tools to work to get gender equal workplaces. And we have, of course, legislation. We have our Swedish Discrimination Act. We have a special chapter with obligatory active measures. And by that, and it says that employers are to conduct goal-oriented work to actively promote equal rights and opportunities in working life, regardless of sex and other discrimination grounds. And there are quite good, actually. I think it's a good legislation, but the problem is that it has to be, overseen so that employers actually do what they are supposed to do. We have the Work Environment Act, and which hasn't so far had a gender equality perspective, but now there is an investigation right now with the mission to include a gender perspective into this Work Environment Act. And then in Sweden, we have this Swedish labor market model, which I guess that you are familiar with. And that means that the collective or the social partners, they have the responsibility actually for employment and working conditions, including pay. And they are supposed to be responsible for that without the interference by the government. And this means, of course, that the collective agreements on these issues, both of course pay, but also gender equality at the workplace, is very, very important. So we have said something about that, of course, about the responsibility of the social partners. And finally, and this is a little bit complicated to not talk about, but to give you a view, but there is it is important to know how the organization of work in different sectors and branches has have consequences for work-related health among women and men. And there are researchers that have been working with this, and they have come forward with a model how to do research on this issue. It is about the organization. So we have recommended it is the Equal Opportunities Agency that has should be commissioned to take this model forward so that it could be used also by the social partners, but also by the agencies, the different agencies that deal with the workplace, actually. You can read about it in our report if it's a bit unclear, but this we think is very important so that you don't just go down to women and men and see how is their life at the workplace. You start by looking at the organization first, and then you see where women and men are actually in the organizations. Then we have measures for gender equal distribution of governmental support and measures. And as you know, large sums of money are spent in the form of public support to individuals. And of course, the support needs to be distributed from a gender equal perspective. And that is not the case right now. So there is need for accurate gender-based statistics, which the agencies are they are obligated to have these kind of gender-based statistics, and they need to analyze it. And of course, they need to follow up on the statistics and see how their work is going to enforce gender equality. And this goes both for the government and the agencies and the social partners as well. The government should, we think, should commission to relevant agencies to introduce gender equality budgeting, because in that you give them, both the government, but also, of course, the agencies, knowledge on how their resources are distributed between women and men, and then they can act on that knowledge, actually. We also think that the government should formulate a separate objective for gender equality in its procurement strategy. You know, procurement is also very much about money. And they should commission the National Agency for Public Procurement to integrate a gender equality perspective in its activities. And here we have been looking at the Public Employment Service and think that they should have a gender equality requirement when they procure private actors, and that they should also closely follow up the distribution of measures, because private actors awarded contracts should of course be subject to the same requirements to follow regulations and so on as agencies are. Finally, we have also given recommendations for measures for more gender equal information and guidance. And we have looked into 3 areas. We have looked into information about financial impacts of individual choices. And we have looked into the tool of nudging. And examples of nudging is it can be about pre-selections in forms. It can be to have active and passive choices. It can be as simple as sending SMS reminders and so on. This is an interesting tool. Another is a tool to calculate the impacts of different choices. And some agencies use that already. And then we have digitalization, which is, you know, invading the work of agencies right now. And there, of course, you need to have a gender equality perspective. So the Agency for Digital Government should be commissioned to follow up and analyze the digitalization of public administration from this gender equality perspective. And then finally also, there should be a gender equality perspective in central government agencies' interaction with individuals and the public. And there we have also recommended that the National Government Service Center should be commissioned to follow up and analyze its activities of its services from a gender equality perspective. So that is what we have been doing and dealing with. And as I think that gender equality has to remain at the focus of every government, irrespective of what happens, within the country or outside the country. And when it comes to the terrible war in Ukraine, I think also it is so important to keep gender equality at the focus in whatever you are doing, when it comes to security, but also when it comes to the labor market, so that we are not going backwards on this issue. So thank you very much for listening and for me to have this time to talk.
Thank you very much indeed, Lise. That's an amazing summary, very salutary, I must say, for a social policy expert in an Anglo-Saxon country who had long thought of Sweden as being the model of gender equality. To see those statistics of such huge differences in lifetime income and capital holdings are really remarkable. Now, we know that from research that older women face particular discrimination compared to older men. So I wonder if within your analysis there is anything that pinpoints the significant discrimination faced by older women compared to older men in the extending working lives agenda.
We are having an age perspective on the different types of incomes, and to see how they work out when it comes to both being paid but also being able to remain on the labor market, actually. But what we can see is that the discrimination starts actually when you get children. That is very significant, and there women start, to not being able to have a career as the men have, and also that they are left behind when it comes to both pay and other employment conditions, actually. And that is obviously seen then in their pension. And they work more part-time, and if you are working part-time, you are not, what shall I say, you lag behind when it comes to career and things like that, and skills development and so on. And you get old.
No, I understand the life course perspective is really important.
I think so, yeah.
A key feature of your work. There's also an appearance sense, isn't there, that the research shows that men are allowed to be older than women, and that the glass ceiling is set for older women based on appearance, and that's an objectionable form of discrimination as well.
Yeah, it is. And also I think that you really need also to go into this what we call value discrimination, the undervaluation of women's job. That I think is really important, because women work in mostly in the welfare system with elderly people and so on, and they get it's a simple thing to say. I mean, they get tired, they can't remain at the labor market that long, maybe. It goes for some men as well, I agree, absolutely.
Right.
But still, some men get at least paid for their work, and women don't actually.
Okay, let's broaden it. I saw that Anne-Sophie had a hand. Do you still want to come in, Anne-Sophie?
It wasn't a hand, it was an applaud for Lise's presentation. You can use the little signs on reactions, so say whether you like it, or you do like this, or you do like that, or you applaud.
So just for everyone's benefit, that's the reactions box at the bottom of the screen. And if you want to make a point or ask Lise a question, you can raise the hand in the box. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. And again, thank Lise for that excellent presentation. And now invite Stephen Bainbridge, who's from the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Training. Stephen is going to make a reaction rather than a presentation. Stephen, are you in the room?
Indeed, I am.
Welcome.
I am. I want to take a slightly different angle to the discussions that we've had so far, but still try to remain relevant to the central issues. I mean, we've worked on the project on the later working life and the transition, and one of the issues that we have talked about is the importance of education, training and learning for people in later working life, and the fact that they would like to continue, many still see the value of that outside the labour market, and for some it could even extend their working life. And I wanted to link it with some of the issues that we are facing today and current EU policies, and how we might take advantage of a crisis. Now, the crisis, of course, is the crisis of the war in Ukraine, and there are estimates that around 6.5 million people will be displaced from Ukraine and will come to the EU. Now, the EU faces, in a very catchy term, a mass influx of displaced persons. And so it is in a position to be able to offer them a temporary protection status for up to 3 years. And it has done this for Ukrainian refugees. And this status provides Ukrainians access to the labour market, educational opportunities for adults, vocational training and practical workplace experience. And this is an important part of integrating Ukrainian refugees into the European labour market, giving opportunity for those who wish to stay to be able to make a new future here in Europe. And helping Ukrainians coming to the EU will be a major issue that faces the Swedish presidency in 2023. Now, the Commission has recommended that to help Ukrainian refugees integrate into the labour market, that they should reduce the formalities for recognition of professional qualifications to a minimum. And it should encourage them to do several things which are listed there in the bullet points. Speed up the process for the recognition of qualifications. Ensure that only essential documents are requested. Dispense with certain requirements where it is possible. Eliminate and reduce costs. Take measures to ensure that national authorities have the capacity to process applications. Provide frontline services with information in Ukrainian, tailored to their needs to help people to have their qualifications recognized. Ensure that all professional skills and competencies are assessed and recognized, regardless of how they are acquired, through formal, informal or non-formal learning, and to put in place measures for language learning. Now, these measures will be followed up. There will be meetings and there will be exchanges of information and ideas on good practice between member states. Now, all of these measures are welcome, and no one, I think, would dispute the importance of helping Ukrainian refugees. But the point I would like to raise is, why are these only emergency measures? and focused on a particular group of people. And why are we only providing additional resources for these systems at times of crises? And I think this reflects a problem of making policies for groups and not for individuals. And I think that there is a read across here into some of the other policy areas that have been discussed today. Once we have built this extra capacity, which we need and we should build, and is an appropriate response to this problem, and once we have built the expertise of processing applications for the recognition of qualifications, and we have decided what we need and what we don't need, and how quickly we can do it, what will we then do? What will we do with these ideas and the innovation that we have developed to accommodate this crisis? And how can those ideas and innovation be brought into the mainstream? Now, this matters. It matters because the EU's adult workforce needs access to learning and qualifications. And by the adult workforce, that includes people in later working life. They are essential for the transformation of the EU into a digital and green society and economy. And they are essential to make the EU more resilient to external shocks, such as economic crises like the financial crisis, political crises like the refugee crisis for Syria in 2016, and the Ukrainian crisis now. And this transformation and building resilience in the EU are stated as priorities for the EU's presidency. Now, resilience, which was an issue raised after the pandemic, is not just about healthcare, but it is about building in the EU a strong skills base to manage economic as well as external shocks. For example, the war in Ukraine has major implications for the future of European energy supplies and how we reform and revise and renew those energy supplies. And we need the skills to be able to do that. And the argument that I want to make here, which I think is a read across to some of the other policy areas, is that we need a more holistic approach rather than breaking things down into specific issues and also breaking things down into helping specific groups, which are not homogeneous. We have a tradition of developing vocational and education training policy to support young people, to support people with disabilities, to support people who are marginalized, to support women. But those groups are not homogeneous. There are all sorts of different ideas, views, needs within those groups. And we need a holistic approach that focuses on the needs of individuals and the needs of people and not on groups. We need to build a system whereby we can take from a menu selection of services that are provided and across a range of policy areas that we can fit together for people to help them in the circumstances that they are in. And the crisis of accommodating Ukrainians fleeing Russian aggression is an opportunity for innovation and invention, the benefits of which the EU should learn from and integrate into its mainstream. And the EU presidency is in a strong position to support this transfer. If we can build a system for the speedy recognition and assessment and validation of skills for Ukrainian refugees, which indeed we should, surely it is a system that we can build for the rest of Europe when this crisis is over, to deal with the other crises that will come and for the need for the development of skills in the European labour force, including those in later working life. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Steve. That was rather a profound input and very much directed to the question of today. There's a lot of detail in what you presented, and I'm hoping that we can circulate those along with the slides from the other speakers if that's acceptable. And I think your plea for a more holistic approach is absolutely spot on. The underlying rationale to try to get some virtue out of the necessity that we're confronted with is very much welcome, and not just for this webinar, but I think for the whole future policy in Europe. Maybe Swedish democracy offers some previous hope in having more holistic approaches that could be a lesson for the rest of Europe. But that's great. Thank you, Steve. Are there any quick questions or responses? Then, to preserve a little time for discussion, I'm going to move straight on to our final speaker, which is Linde Lindkvist from the Swedish Institute for Human Rights. And again, I think Linde is just going to make some remarks in response to the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, Indre, Lise, and Steve for great and very thought-provoking presentations. As Alan said, I'm from the Swedish Institute for Human Rights, which is a brand new government agency which opened shop on the 1st of January this year. It's the Swedish National Human Rights Institution, which means that we have an independent status in relation to the government and other government agencies. And our main job is essentially to kind of survey the human rights situation in Sweden in a very broad sense, and then consult with the government on ways to improve the status of human rights in Sweden, but also increase public knowledge about human rights related issues, as well as to participate in international cooperation with UN bodies, EU bodies, etc., which have focus on human rights. So let me just say that this is a very novel setting for me. I'm mainly in my own research, because I'm a researcher by background. I've been focusing heavily on kind of the history of human rights and modern history of rights, as well as the history of children's rights. So I'm not very familiar with the details of rights of persons in late working life, but I have just a few kind of broad questions which may serve perhaps as something that we can use, if you like, as a kind of basis for our discussion here this afternoon. And I think my main question is really what human rights can do for you. Is there a value of kind of using a rights language in this setting, and what would kind of rights bring to this topic? Because I listened very closely, but none of you actually used the word rights in your presentation. What I could hear. So sometimes that happens, that we kind of think that rights can be related to everything that is of value, but sometimes kind of rights become like an add-on that we say, well, this is all about rights, or it's something that kind of looms in the background. And I was thinking that this goal of inclusive, extended, and sustainable working life could actually be seen as a right, as something that we all could kind of lay claim to, because we're human beings, and because having independence and having a sense of participation in community is kind of what makes us, human life valuable. So that's something that we could sort of strive for in its own right. It's not something that has to be justified in relation to broader social goals or societal goals. But I think, if you're looking for kind of policy advice here, I guess that the first thing you learn when you do a course in policy analysis is that the key for every policy paper that you write is that you have to find out the goal or kind of what the problem that the policymakers are trying to solve at the moment, and how your input can actually kind of help them solve their problems. And I think Steve pointed to this in a very lucid way when he said, well, you know, strengthening the rights of persons in late working life is a key to solving a host of wider social and political issues, such as green transition, and strengthen integration, breaking segregation, etc. And I think that could be a very kind of useful way of justifying why these issues are really worth are of extreme political significance. However, there's also always a risk that kind of pulls away from the kind of focus on the inherent value of in this case inclusive and extended and sustainable working life. So I think rights language is always trying to sort of push back against arguments that are focused on kind of the broader value, because you can always show that, you know, maybe this is not something that helps green transition, and maybe this is not something that helps to break in segregation, etc. And then you kind of lose your argument. But if you can show that this is something that has value in its own right, then it's something that everyone kind of needs to take into consideration. One problem, though, if you try to apply a human rights lens, is that human rights is very weak when it comes to discrimination on the basis of age. So if you look at the international human rights treaties adopted by the United Nations, you will never find a reference to discrimination on age being a problem. So discrimination on the basis of race is forbidden, gender forbidden, etc. But age is kind of it's sort of allowed in the framework of international human rights law. So I think that's a weakness in the current human rights system that we have, and something that might kind of take away some of the value of using human rights in this setting. But these are just some sort of very broad and general reflections from my part. And again, just thank you for inviting me. And it's very interesting to take part of you know, all the research that you're doing in this setting. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Linde. You raise a very important point, that a challenge really, whether human rights is a perspective that certainly is applicable at the United Nations level, it's a global level, but hasn't been applied consistently at a European level. So that's a challenge. So let's see what people say about that. Lisa has a hand raised, or was that a thumbs up, Lisa?
It was both a thumb up and I would like to say that what Linde brings up is really important, and I almost feel a little bit ashamed that I didn't use the perception of actually human rights, because that is a starting point in our report as well. And I should have started by saying that we are talking about human rights. So I really give you a thumb up to remind us again about that. And it is, you know, human rights has this individual perspective. We are not talking about groups, we are talking about individuals. So I just wanted to say that a big thumb up, and I will remind myself again to bring it up at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further comments or questions, you can range more broadly than simply the human rights question, as we're coming to the end of our session. So if there's, Anne-Sophie has put something in chat. Thank you, Anne-Sophie.
Yeah, it's just because Linde was mentioning that age discrimination is not approached from a human rights perspective, but this has changed a lot in recent years, thanks to campaigns by older persons lobbying and so on. And at United Nations, there is this open-ended working group, which is keep working on trying to get a convention to protect the rights, a UN convention to protect the rights of older persons. But it has been brought to the conversation at EU level, because, you know, as you know, at EU level since 2002, we have a non-discrimination legislation that forbids age discrimination, but only in employment. So that covers what this project is doing. It's supposed to, although you are working, focusing on longer working life or extended working life, this should fall under the EU legislation that is applied everywhere, including in Norway. Norway has done much more than most EU member states have in this field. So it's worth looking at what they are doing. And the debate has extended beyond employment, because even if you just want to focus on ensuring equality and combat discrimination on the ground of old age in employment, you realize very quickly that the causes for discrimination in the labor market are actually coming from outside policy areas that are considered to be outside employment policies. It has to do with pensions, very obviously, but also with social protection, child care, elder care, and just cultural realities that are not addressed at all by the very narrow approach that we have so far at EU level. So they keep working also at EU level to extend the scope of this so-called employment directive that is the only area where age discrimination is forbidden, to extend it like the race directive to all other areas. We still need to work on it, but Germany has moved a long way. They were against it, and in particular during their recent EU presidency, they showed very strong interest in moving forward on that. And the next UNEC Ministerial Conference, which will take place mid-June in Rome, is going to devote quite a lot of time, including in the NGO Forum, which is being organized together with the Research Forum, so very interesting for your project. They are devoting quite a lot of time on the issue of prolonging or extending working life. Prolonging is maybe more negative. It seems like it's mandatory and you cannot retire earlier. But extending working life is more open, it's more neutral. So I prefer this term. Yeah, it's good to keep also an eye on what they are doing. And then at WHO level, because there were some references to occupational health issues and the gender dimension in that, WHO Europe has this decade on active and healthy aging, call it healthy aging, which is also devoting a lot of time on that. And the Euro Ageism report project has just finished, and they have done also a lot of interesting work on the different issues that were raised that might give you some ammunition to build your case for your recommendations. And so well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie. I'd say historically in Europe that Britain was always resistant to the use of the human rights discourse, and of course the exit of the UK from the EU may provide an opening to bring back that discourse. Thank you. I saw a hand from one of our colleagues in the research project, Jolanta. Are you still?
Right. Thank you very much. Right, thanks a lot, and I do appreciate that Linde mentioned human rights and age, and also I hope that somehow can contribute with saying that a few things are going on and develop in this domain. But Anne-Sophie, as always, great in a clear way, was first with mentioning at least WHO Global Report on Ages, but also as here we have members of ITN, Euro Ageism, so policy briefs and some policy reports, not only in the labor market, but also I think that the crucial things, especially taking into account also Steve's presentation about the digital competences, so the technology and the right to information because of the lack of competences in use of new media. It's also included in the project EuroAges mentioned by Anne-Sophie, which finished. So probably, and we also have members in this project of the, so maybe for some of you today being with us on that seminar could be very interesting to look at some ongoing, even the project finished, still some publication and policy report and policy brief will be delivered, could be very interesting for different groups. So maybe I will send by chat links to the web page. So thank you, Anne-Sophie, for me, because I know that H platform was very active, and Nena Gorganci on that part of human rights. So that's why we would like to give some additional input that we take care about that.
Thank you very much, Jolanta. Time for one last contribution, if anyone wants to raise a point or a question. Slightly beyond our close time, so I don't want to overstay our welcome. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to thank all of our speakers very much. Indre, Lise, Stephen, who had to leave early, and Linde. Thank you very much for your presentations, particularly to Indre and Lise and Linde for speaking in English. That is deeply appreciated by the English speakers, certainly. And these webinars can't take place without a lot of work behind the scenes. And you may have seen some names and faces as well as giving a presentation. Indre is absolutely crucial to the organization. I want to thank her and Anika, our colleague, and Gwilyn also is somewhere in the background. Sincere thanks to all of you for the organization. I promise that we'll put together the slides and Steve's account. If Linde wants to contribute anything, even if it's just a website link, then we will send that around to all participants and make sure that everyone's copied in. With that, I will say thank you again to everyone for your participation and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, Indre. Bye, Anne-Sophie. Take care.